Hello, Colorado. I hope it has been a good week for you, one that you've spent with family, friends, and maybe some lively Thanksgiving table conversations. Our insiders are chomping at the bit to dig into everything that has unfolded during this final full week of November. So let's get started with this week's Colorado Inside Out. Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Dyer. Let me get right to introducing you to this week's Insider panel. We start with Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward; Krista Kafer, columnist with the Denver Post; Marianne Goodland, chief legislative reporter for Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes; and Alton Dillard, former election spokesperson for the city and county of Denver and current consultant at the Dillard Group, senior advisor at Rockford Gray, and political analyst at Denver 7. Busy guy. We start where we left off last week when one of our panelists pointed to Congressman Jason Crow as her low of the week, citing a TV interview in which he defended a video that he helped create, one encouraging service members to refuse orders if they believe that those orders violate the Constitution. Now, after our show was recorded, the president then called that act punishable by death. Then came a bomb threat to Crow's Aurora office, and the calls for investigations and punishments have only grown louder. Patty, Congressman Crow, and the others involved are not budging. They are not backing down.
No, and imagine the gall of this man whose only field of victory was reality TV, who called John McCain a loser because he had been a prisoner of war in Vietnam. The gall of Donald Trump to go after these 6 lawmakers, threaten them with death for taking the heroic act of making a video saying to other members of the military, you do not have to do illegal acts. So everyone from Army Ranger Jason Crow to Mark Kelly, astronaut, military man, married to Gabby Giffords and probably the next president of the United States, but threatening someone like Mark Kelly with death. If we want to talk about her heroism, think this weekend, too, of other military men who've refused to do illegal acts, starting with Silas Sewell, who refused to participate in the Sand Creek Massacre on November 29th, 1864, and was assassinated as thanks on the streets of Denver in 1865. So we should all be thankful to these heroes, these 6 people who've stood up to Trump.
Okay.
Yeah, Patty's right. They're heroes. They did an act of courage by saying to servicemen and women, you do not have to follow illegal orders that are against the Constitution. Whether you've been deployed to a city, whether you've been asked to fire upon individuals that are possibly innocent, you don't have to do those things. And here's the deal. If you do things that are illegal, that's no defense. If later on somebody says, hey, these things were illegal, you participated, you are still liable. I'm just following orders is not a defense. So whether you agree with the video or disagree with the video, I think that it is an act of courage. The fact that the president then said horrific things via Twitter, denigrating men and women who have acted honorably. And the thing is it's their opinion. He's free to disagree. What he is not free to do is to call upon the FBI to investigate them and to encourage others to seek revenge against men and women who have served this country with honor.
Mm-hmm. Marianne.
This continued obsession with saying things that are not presidential. I can't even imagine any president that we had before Donald Trump saying the things that we're now hearing. And it's disturbing. And it's actually really frightening to consider what could happen to these people. You look at, and I'm going to cite an example from Indiana, where I was a week ago. The Indiana legislature, which is Republican dominated and has been pretty much the entire time that I can remember, actually stood up to Trump and said, we are not going to redistrict. We're not going to redraw our congressional maps. Republican lawmakers got death threats in Indiana because they stood up to Trump. This is what our political culture is like now, and it's it's just very sad to see.
Alton.
And I agree with Mary Ann. What happened to toning down the rhetoric? And I also agree with what I've heard around the table, that these folks are heroes, not only for their service, but for having the courage to step up now. And so, so I have seen coverage essentially saying that now they all have to have extra security. And to, again, Mary Ann's point, this rhetoric, this is really, it concerns me, because this is going to be another instance of the sort of nutcase sleeper cells getting activated, because now you've got these people who just, again, stated their opinion, but because it's not a popular opinion with the great leader, we're in this situation. And it just makes no sense. And, when you think back to these different moments when you're like, okay, we have just jumped the shark seems to keep moving when it comes to Donald Trump.
Let's turn now to Colorado's top statewide leader, Governor Polis, who is facing a great deal of scrutiny right now, along with slipping approval ratings and even a death threat this week. That surfaced on a conservative podcast tied to this decision before the governor as to whether to release or not release election denier Tina Peters from state prison. Meanwhile, the governor's effort to privatize Pinnacle Assurance, the state workers' comp carrier, is not as moving as smoothly as he had hoped, and Coloradans continue to look to leadership, to the governor, for answers on the rising cost of living, which is becoming an increasingly difficult thing for many families across our state. Krista.
Well, I think that Governor Polis needs to come out and say, look, we're not going to transfer Tina Peters to a federal facility, because that whole point of that exercise is to free her. Trump and his crazies, they want every election denier, from the Jan 6 insurrectionists all the way to, the crazy liars, lawyers that were part of his conspiracy theory to overturn the 2020 election. And now we're down to Tina Peters. The problem is she's in a Colorado prison because she broke Colorado law, was convicted of a jury of her peers, and she's there. He can't release her. So what he's trying to do is circumvent that by having her transfer to federal facilities where then, some bureaucratic error can take place and she can be freed. Meanwhile, you've got this crazy guy, this podcaster, Joe Altman, who's saying that Polis and Weiser and Griswold and others should be killed. He keeps saying they should be hung. And I just want to point out to him, and perhaps also to Trump, who says similar things, that the term is hanged. If somebody's dying at the gallows, the term is hanged. If you use hung, you can say a picture has been hung. You could say a jury has been hung. But if you say a person has been hung, that's a different connotation. And I'm not going to give a lengthy description as to why that's problematic, except to say to Joe and Donald, you might want to stop.
Okay, thank you. Our wordsmith here at the table, thank you. Mary Ann.
Oh, you got me there, Krista. I've been watching the governor in the last, this year as he heads into the last 12 months of his time as governor, and we're seeing some really interesting missteps. And the Pinnacle may be another one. The bridge project that turned into such a fiasco. And then Jeff Davis, the head of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, announced that he was stepping down to take a job that didn't exist before this week, apparently, or at least according to the Department of Natural Resources website, and that's another issue. The whole issue of the wolf reintroduction program, which Davis has been in charge of since the first wolf was released, and the disaster in Washington State about 10 days ago when Washington State said, "You're not getting our wolves." The fact that Jeff Davis steps down mere days after that, kind of gives you an idea of what it was that was his downfall. But the governor, it's sort of an escalating series of just kind of odd things going on. The Pinnacle deal, Para told me this week that they want over $300 million to let Pinnacle out of the state pension plan. And at least back in January, when that number was floated, Pinnacle said no, and that was the end of it. So that may put a nail in the coffin that you can't pull out.
Okay.
Yeah, when it comes to Polis, and I've said at this table that you're going to be looking at a different level of lame duckery when it comes to him. It's like libertarian lame duckery. So in addition to what you're talking about Pinnacle, I've also seen discussions about trying to tap para. And it's like, now, wait a minute. We've already got people concerned about their Social Security, which is an earned benefit. You've got pensioners concerned about their pensions. And you have to remember, Polis is independently wealthy. There's a very sort of sense of let them eat cake when I hear them even talking about that. And to the Peters thing, as somebody who worked in elections administration and knows people who received threats because of her actions, the fact that he will not just come out and say, we're not doing this. There's no nuance here. This is a yes or no decision. And so this going back and forth and trying to decide what he's going to do, and the county clerks are understandably concerned. And remember, county clerks, A, bipartisan, B, majority Republican in the state of Colorado. It just doesn't make any sense. So again, agreeing with Mary Ann, the missteps that continue are baffling.
All right, Patty.
Well, he pardoned turkeys at the governor's mansion last week, but the turkeys are coming home to roost over this issue at the governor's. There is no excuse for him not coming out strong immediately after the county clerks, the best organization, I think, of governmental officials in this state. When they came out Tuesday, another group really of heroes, because they've been threatened and said, please, do the right thing, do the legal thing. She's convicted in Colorado. She disobeyed every rule we follow as county clerks. That he hasn't come out strongly after that, after they'd been threatened that weekend because of another strong letter that had gone in response to Trump's request. It's appalling. He's got to come out and say something. And Krista, hung or hanged, you're still dead. And it's appalling that Joe Oltmann continues to push this scenario, this narrative. He's the one who's the primary person behind the election denier rumors back in 2020. He has got to shut up. And I will say that. Shut it up. Mm-hmm. Any way you want to say it, he's got to go.
Okay. It was 10 years ago, November 27th, when 3 people were killed and 9 others injured in the shooting at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs. The man charged with the crimes, Robert Deere, died last weekend, though word of his death did not surface until midweek. He was never tried for the attack. Despite initially admitting to the shootings, he was later, though, deemed incompetent to stand trial and remained in federal custody for all of these years. Marianne, you were a reporter on the scene that day covering the shooting and then the barricade. It went on for hours.
I was probably down there, I guess, between 4 and 6 hours. And yes, it was bitterly cold that day. But watching the hostages being escorted out of the Planned Parenthood clinic in North Colorado Springs, knowing that they had spent hours in terror, it was just, it breaks my heart even today. And then they took Deere out later, not much longer after that. The tragedy of the shooting and of Deere's death is that there will be no justice for the people who died, including a police officer who was a pastor and an officer at the CU Colorado Springs campus. There will be no justice for them. There will never be anyone held to account for everything that happened on that day. And that to me is the greatest tragedy of all in that shooting, is everyone's going to get left out in the cold, and that's a sad situation.
And they probably already felt that way because it was taking so long and things kept getting continued.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I am glad to hear, especially around the table here, is that we're losing the political correctness and reintroducing the word crazy into the lexicon. Robert Deere was the real McCoy. That dude was crazy. And so I always say there's a difference between being mentally ill, say yodeling or doing Hamlet's soliloquy on the 16th Street Mall, versus shooting people. And see, my threshold is always going to be harm to yourselves or others. That is crazy behavior. And it also, again, spotlights this whole competency issue. And I'm going to give a shout out to my colleagues over at 7 News who are taking a deep dive into this issue. Because in addition to the Robert Deere thing, you have the King super shooter, who they sat on until they made him competent and made sure he was facing some charges, and now he's doing like 2,000 years in prison. We've got to go back to a place where you cannot let the actions of the 1% affect the 99. We have to be careful about who is running around free in our society.
Patty.
Amazing that it was 10 years. He is behind bars at least, but they couldn't render him competent for a trial. And in fact, his lawyers went all the way to say, no, he is not going to be medically treated so he can become competent. And then ironically, finally, after it went to the Supreme Court here, he was on the medical treatment to be found competent, even though he said, I'm not crazy, which is probably your best proof that he was crazy. But in the end, he couldn't be restored to competency. That was in September, that they still said, we cannot try him. So for 10 solid years, people are in limbo. And so we need to look at the definitions. We need to look at where to house these people. But out on the streets is not a good solution. At least in this case, he never was back out on the streets.
Do you think the competency will come up in the legislature this year?
Oh, there's no question about that. The governor's already talking about it. Lawmakers are already talking about it. I don't think there's any question of that.
Yeah. Krista, your thoughts?
What's wrong with yodeling on the 16th Street Mall?
It's not a mall anymore. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's true. It's just 16th Street. I mean, this is a tragic situation. You have people who are murdered. You have somebody who's mentally ill. And I think it's important to recognize that the vast majority of people who struggle with severe, even severe mental illness are not dangerous to themselves or others. But for those that are dangerous to themselves and others, they need to be somewhere where they're safe and separate from the rest of society. I will give credit to the Trump administration for broaching the issue of we need to go back to having institutions for those who cannot live in the community. There is a percentage of people who really need to be somewhere else. And I think about when I went to Starbucks the other day, they had to lock the door because there was a person outside who was making all kinds of threats, who had physically attacked some customers. When I saw him, he was just having a full conversation with like 5 people who weren't there. And the police were slow to respond. That person needs to be somewhere where he can get treatment. In the meanwhile, the customers and the young woman behind the barista, I mean, she should not have had to carry that weight.
I imagine the linguists out there are already debating the word of the year, and transparency might be in the running. It is a word that we've been hearing a lot of and using lately, from the skepticism surrounding the weekend swearing in of the new DPS board members to this week's ruling from a federal judge requiring ICE agents to follow the proper steps when making arrests. Transparency is very much in the spotlight these days. Alton, I will begin with you.
Denver Public Schools and their inability to get out of their own way, it just remains baffling to me. It really does. And so, again, as someone who worked in elections administration, they are correct and they do have a very tight statutory deadline to do that swearing in. I mean, as soon as we would conduct a coordinated election, which is an odd year, off year election, the phone would ring as soon as, election night was over. When are you guys going to certify? When are you guys going to certify the results? We have to get our board sworn in. But you would think because of all the concerns about their lack of transparency, they would have figured out a way to coordinate schedules or whatever they had to do to make sure that everyone was there and that this swearing in took place in the public. And so starting out with half a new board, and still starting out from a place where you are calling transparency into question day one, it is such an unforced error.
And even more appalling, because they did have to do it within the 10 days,
Yes.
That's true, but that they were trying to elect the new officers, the new board
Yes.
chair positions, that when 2 people couldn't be there, that was really appalling, and just shows how far this DPS board, and we'll see how it's how it is when it's reconstituted,
Right.
is willing to go. But also go to transparency with the ICE arrests when there are not warrants, there's no cause to go, that we're finally going to get some transparency, maybe, thanks to a judge's ruling this week. But we see a lack of transparency everywhere now. And reporters, we spend a lot of time trying to get information. And I think, and Marianne will probably agree with me, it is harder than ever. There are fewer reporters than ever, and the roadblocks being put up to our work for the public to get information to them, those are higher than ever.
Yep. Absolutely.
Krista.
I want to thank the journalists at this table. I'm not a journalist. I'm a columnist. I can work because of the work that they do. And they're the ones that are primarily exposing this stuff. We would not know that the Trump administration was breaking the law in many cases when it comes to immigrants. They are here legally, and now they've been detained. And even if they get released, they don't get that time back. I mean, a lot of these folks are working at jobs where they're not on salary, so they just miss a month of work. Who here can pay the mortgage if they missed a month of work? Also, a young woman that was arrested and detained here in Colorado for 3 weeks had to drop the classes she was taking at college. She doesn't get that back. And so until the Trump administration starts to comply with the law, I want to take my hat off for those who are exposing one after another those infractions, those violations of our laws, including our Constitution.
Okay. Marianne.
And I absolutely agree with Patty. The fight by reporters to force, as much as we can, elected officials to come out of the shadows and let us know what they're doing. This is a constant issue for those of us at the state capitol in dealing with the governor and dealing with the legislature. And elected officials are increasingly very comfortable with living in the dark and keeping the public out of the public business. And this is so appalling to me, and it is a fight that I wage all the time. Most recently, when the governor and the Joint Budget Committee and the leadership of the House and Senate all had unannounced meetings with the governor to discuss the budget. This was on October 31st. And these conversations were actually rather illuminating. I actually got to sit in on one of those discussions, and there were things that came out in there that didn't come out later in the day when the governor was actually publicly talking about the budget. This is why we need to keep forcing elected officials to do their jobs and to do it in front of us. And frankly, the public is not doing their job in demanding it. Sorry, that's my soapbox.
That's okay. All right. Let's talk about some of the highs and the lows from this week. We'll start on a low note with Patty.
I'm going to return to the Sand Creek Massacre, the darkest, deadliest day in Colorado history. There's a program at the library on Saturday about with some of the descendants of the survivors speaking. And meanwhile, a certain publication that Marianne is not responsible for, the Gazette, just editorialized that the Civil War statue that was already toppled should go back in a space that the state legislature has said should now be reserved for a monument to this state's original inhabitants. That's disgraceful. It's been settled. That statue belongs there.
Okay.
You know, human conflict takes a toll, and the people who bore the brunt of that toll on this continent were the Native Americans. But there were also moments of peace, moments of intermarriage, moments of trade. And the day that we celebrate Thanksgiving, when you had Native Americans and people who had come from Europe together, celebrating, eating together, sitting next to each other at the table is a beautiful thing. So shame on those at the university level that are calling this a day of grief, that are trying to quote unquote decolonize Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is something that we can all celebrate. It's a beautiful thing.
Okay, Marianne?
My disgrace of the week, TSA. And I want to be clear, I went through 2 TSA checkpoints in the past week, one at Denver and the other in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The Fort Wayne TSA was great, no problems. The TSA here in Denver, I was selected for special screening of my genital region.
What? Sorry.
I had a hysterectomy a year ago, so all those parts are gone now, and apparently that's now of interest to TSA, and it was humiliating and frustrating, and I told the TSA people, I said, I'll be talking about this, I promise you.
That's so weird and so awful. And I can't think of other women who are going through that as well. Follow that one.
Yeah, mine's going to be a little lighter, literally, in that this whole daylight savings thing, please get rid of this. This is the one that I really struggle with. The clock says 11, your body says midnight, and we're almost 3 weeks past it, and I'm still having trouble adjusting. Put the clocks in one place, leave them alone.
Okay, all right. Something positive. Patty.
To everyone who watches this show and comes up to us at various places to say how much they appreciate Channel 12 and Colorado Inside Out, I'm just thankful that everyone is watching, everyone's still reading, everyone is still thinking about how important it is to protect the Colorado we love and how to make it better. And so thank you to all the people who watch.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Krista.
My hat's off to...
You have a frog in your throat.
I know, I apologize. I guess I should give my hats off to the makers of cold drops. I really appreciate the county clerks, also the DA of Mesa County, and also our Attorney General, who are pushing back on the release of Tina Peters and upholding our laws here in Colorado.
All right, now Marianne.
I would like to say thank you and a salute to people who families who take care of loved ones when they are in the latter years of their life. And this is something that I have had a recent experience with. For people who take care of others with dementia and Alzheimer's, my hats are off to you, because there is almost nothing more difficult. And keep up the good fights. And the most important thing, find help where you need it. If you've got somebody that can come and spell you for a day or a week, take advantage of that, because the stress is unbelievable.
Okay. All right, Alton.
And my high is it's high school hoop season. And so I get the opportunity to coach at Martin Luther King Early College, but it's just such a great time of the year. Now you're not sitting out, in the cold football bleachers once we're into November and December, and you really get a chance just to watch the competition at all levels. I love this time of the year. And then also, sneak preview, in 26-27, Colorado is going to be going to a shot clock for high school basketball. So you're going to start seeing that transition and that being tested out here and there. So be ready.
Did you know that, Mrs. Basketball over there?
I did not, but since you've come back to me, I just want to say one other thing.
What?
Go Hoosiers, beat Purdue.
Okay. All right, my high of the week is all of the people who are helping travelers get to their destinations this holiday weekend, and really for the whole season that's ahead of us. And I want to give a shout out to the handful of United Airlines employees who have been working at DIA for about 4 years now. I encourage you to check out an article in the Denver Post that profiles the Special Olympics athletes who are United Airlines employees who assist customers with customer service at DIA. It could be anything from printing out baggage tags and boarding passes to giving directions and doing just about anything it is needed to make someone's time through DIA a little bit less stressful. So thank you to all of them. Thank you, all of our insiders. And as Patty mentioned, thanks to you who are watching along with us or listening to our podcast on Spotify and Apple. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.